All right, everybody, welcome back to Off the Record, a cop and a lawyer. I'm the criminal defense lawyer, that's the cop, and today we are starting part 3 of our basics you should know about law enforcement searches according to a cop, and you guessed it, a criminal defense lawyer. So part 1 was talking about traffic stops, okay, and sort of the nuances there. Part 2 was probation searches, which is what we did last time. And today we're going to talk about searches that are a result of a search warrant. All right. So generally we've been talking about searches that don't require a search warrant. And now we're entering the category of, searches that result from an actual warrant. And we'll break that down a little bit. Cop, why don't you give us a little breakdown on, how you go about generally just how do you go and get a warrant? Like procedurally, what do you have to do?
So a search warrant is essentially, it can be kind of confusing. When I learned how to do it, I was confused. It's not that confusing. It's a police report that covers the probable cause to arrest somebody. And let's say that they're not arrested yet. Let's say I'm going to search a drug house and the drug dealer's, maybe going to be inside that house, and I need a search warrant to get into that house. Essentially write a police report which covers the probable cause of why I want to go into that house and why that person's Fourth Amendment right doesn't exist in that moment for the execution of the search warrant. So I write a probable cause statement, an affidavit, and I then present it to a judge, and we're going to touch on that too, and maybe have a couple laughs, because I've gone to some weird places to get search warrants signed by judges. A judge would then sign my search warrant, and I have to indicate after the probable cause and the reason that it's lawful to go inside someone's home. You need to understand what the scope of that search is. And that's very important, especially for somebody who might be a client of yours in the future. The scope of the search is extremely important because it dictates what I'm allowed to search and what I'm not allowed to search. Now, let's say it's for a drug house. It's going to cover the entire house, the yard, anything on the yard, the cars in the yard, the people in the house, everything, anywhere drugs can be stored, including, let's say, like, I don't know if we can see back here, like a little container, and so that's really important to understand what the scope is. And then so a judge would sign it. That allows me then the authority to go inside someone's home, the means of which could be, a knock and they open up and we talk about why I'm there, hand them this copy of the search warrant. Or it could be, I've been on search warrant teams that, doors get kicked in, ripped off, etc. So now I'm in the house, the search is done, and I'm just going to kind of cliff notes this. At the end, I have to leave a receipt of the property that I took, and then I have to do a similar action with the court, a search warrant service return. So that's really important. I think that stuff maybe you can touch on better from your perspective, but essentially I need to write a probable cause statement and get a judge to sign it that allows me to go inside someone's home.
Now, before we get into like the nitty gritty of, the different issues that come up and kind of the legality of everything, come on, you left us hanging. So what kind of places have you gone?
Oh man, nothing crazy earth shattering, but I've gone to golf courses. I've gone to like clubhouses. I've gone to their homes. I've actually gone to one judge's home that I had a case or multiple cases with. I can't remember. I remember being on the stand with this judge next to me for an extended period of time, probably a couple of days of testimony or overtime days of testimony, and being inside this person's home and just seeing how, they treat you, how they interact with you is just, it's interesting because, you got this judge who's, very proper and on the stand and is the symbol of authority. To be inside their home while they're in PJs sipping a glass of wine or something,
Right. Yeah.
It's awkward for me because I've gone inside judges' homes when I've worked undercover, so I had really long beard, I'm wearing dirty clothes, my hair is longer, I've got maybe baseball cap. It's like I take off my shoes, I look, the part that you're inside this very proper, nice home. But yeah, I've gone onto a golf course. I think that was probably the biggest one where I was like, drove a golf cart out to hold whatever, because he was the judge that was going to sign it. That's where he is that time, and he's finishing up his round of golf, signs it, and we leave. So.
Right, because generally, right, they go on rotation, like the duty judges, right, just like the
right. Can you touch on that so people don't think I'm crazy?
The judges have their own system and their own calendaring of these sort of things, and I'm not necessarily privy to it, but I know that based on whatever schedule they determine, there's going to be one judge that's going to be available for warrants, right? And same thing right now. For example, there's certain judges are available for bail reviews or for emergency hearings, and so you would reach out to that particular judge. And that makes sense, right? You can't, sometimes a judge may get a call in the middle of the night, right, or really late at night. And so it's not like everybody can be constantly available. So there's just one person who's going to be on call, just like a doctor would. And so that's what usually happens. But I'm kind of interested. So when you kind of, you submit this probable cause statement or the affidavit, right? And you hand over to the judge and say, hey, judge, here's, what I believe is probable cause. Have you ever had a situation where the judge is like, sorry, buddy, I don't think there's enough here? Has that ever happened?
It has happened. It hasn't happened to me. It's happened around me. I've seen it happen. Not to the point where it's like, hey, you don't have it. Don't bring this to me. When people write search warrants, you have to understand, if you're a police officer writing search warrants, you're either, let's say, a detective, like almost like a Brooklyn Nine-Nine deal, right? Where you have an office, you've got a team of detectives. In my experience, I was buying drugs undercover. And so my team was undercover officers, surveillance officers, some SWAT guys for the real fast warrants that came up. And these are professionals. These guys and girls, they know their stuff. And also I'm not going to say that these teams are perfect or I'm perfect. That's not what I'm saying. But when it comes to a probable cause statement on a search warrant, I've seen a judge ask for clarification on things. So I've seen that. So to answer your question, yes, I've seen it where it's like, hey, you don't have it. Yeah, I have it, but hey, I want you to explain this more. What does this mean? Or why did you leave this out? Because we have informant information or whatever. So it's a bit of a dialogue back and forth at times. There's times where we've handed over search warrants. The judge reads it, signs it, hands it back. Not a word is really, there's not much to talk about. But to the point where it's like, hey, you don't have it, leave. No, I haven't seen that, but I've definitely seen like, we need a little bit more clarification. Can you expand on this? And that's good. I always appreciate it when, feedback is given in any regard, but especially when it comes to a search warrant, you are pausing this person's Fourth Amendment right. And, I'm in my home right now, you're in your office, and that's what allows us to be free, have these conversations, without fear of the cops knocking on our doors and unjustly searching us. So the Fourth Amendment is my favorite amendment. And
I'm right there with you.
And so, when I'm serving search warrants, I don't take it lightly because I certainly wouldn't want my door kicked in. That's what happens sometimes on search warrants, So, there's people in there that aren't necessarily involved in the crime you're investigating. There's children. The effect that can have on them can be great. And so it's a big responsibility for a law enforcement officer to write a search warrant and execute on that search warrant. It is not something I ever took lightly.
So then let's kind of talk through what happens after a search warrant's executed. You guys, conduct your search, you find evidence, as you mentioned, you leave an inventory sheet of exactly what you took, and then you have to return everything to the court, just letting know what it is that you did, right? Usually what happens is you find something that leads to a certain person getting arrested, right? Especially in drug cases. And so then the question kind of becomes, all right, well, man, if a judge said that there was probable cause for law enforcement to enter the home and to conduct a search, is there anything a criminal defense lawyer could potentially do, right? What are the types of issues that maybe come up in this scenario? And so one of those, and I want to get into that because that's important. One of those you've already touched on, which is the scope, right? So a warrant has to very narrowly state the scope of the search with a obviously relevant connection to the probable cause. For example, if you are, and this is just kind of like a real basic example to illustrate the point, right? But let's say that you are going into a home to search for a rifle, and that's all you care about is just the rifle, all right? Because maybe it's connected to something and you have information that rifle's in the house, right? And you get the warrant. Hey, I've got info that the rifle is stored here, it's connected to a crime, whatever the case may be, you get the probable cause to execute the warrant, or to get the warrant, and then you go execute it. You do the search, but then you're looking into a little tiny box that's in somebody's drawer, right, in their bedroom. So then the question is, did the warrant allow you to search there, right? So there's two questions. One, did you go beyond the scope that was authorized by the warrant? Or maybe the judge allowed the search of everything, right? Allowed the search of the entire house, for you to be able to look for this rifle, for example. So then somebody like me would come along and say, hey, look, let's really focus on what the reason was for the warrant and the probable cause. If it was to search for this rifle, there's no way you're going to find a rifle in a shoebox in a closet. It's just not going to fit. And so I think that the scope of the warrant went beyond the probable cause. And so that would be maybe one argument I would make if it wasn't narrowly tailored, right? That's kind of the magic lingo. Then some of the other things, that we do is I'll get a warrant and I'll usually very carefully review the language of the warrant, okay? And I'll carefully review the language of the affidavit, the probable cause, right? Why the judge granted. But what happens nowadays especially is that sometimes law enforcement will get a warrant over the phone, telephonically. And those things are almost always recorded. And so what I will want is not just sort of the written report that was submitted that the cop, sometimes will just sit there and read on the phone, but I want to get the transcript. I want to know the conversation that was had between the cop and the judge, and sometimes, there may be a prosecutor on the line as well, because there can be little nuggets there that I can follow up on and look into. And so getting a full picture of that is obviously super important.
You touched on it, the probable cause part, and then that leads to the search to find the thing. Now, let's say, I'm searching for an ATM machine, a stolen ATM machine. You're right. I can search in places where an ATM machine can be. I can't then open up desk drawers and things like that and find, the gun that killed Jimmy Hoffa, and a person linked to that gun. I would lose that in a motion to suppress, right?
Yeah, right. If you found, and that brings up a whole bunch of interesting issues regarding standing and everything else. But yeah, ultimately, if you go beyond the scope, then that evidence would have been, would be deemed illegally obtained. And so then, someone like me would come along, and if I'm paying attention and carefully reading the scope and trying to evaluate whether there is a sufficient legal connection between the probable cause and the scope, then if a judge agrees, then obviously, yeah, that's going to get suppressed and you're not going to be able to use it.
And if the probable cause is not tight, like if a car stop leads to the arrest of somebody, and the arrest search leads to that thing that is now hanging over somebody, facing years in prison, let's say, but the car stop was not lawful for whatever case, maybe an error, maybe a lack of education on the officer, whatever the case may be, then you lose all that. So I'm glad you touched on it, that the probable cause can be attacked if not super tight, and then the scope can be attacked if not played within those boundaries. A lot of the way I think about law enforcement when I was training recruits is, I know it's not a game. I say game, and I'm going to use that language, and I know it's not a game, but for the sake of it, you have rules to this game and boundaries in this sandbox that we play with, and the boundaries change because of case law. So what may start out as a square sandbox that I'm allowed to play in now turns into a hexagon, and I have to understand that to be able to identify hexagons now. And so as case law gets developed and comes out, and as laws change, as propositions get put into place or taken away, the rules of this game constantly change. So part of my motivation to want to do this is to inspire cops, everybody, to want to get better, including myself. I am not perfect. I'm just the guy willing to be out in front and say I'm not perfect and have these conversations. But, the rules of this game constantly change. If you don't play in those rules, then you can lose, in court. So I'm really glad you touched on that, because that's the part that you would deal with when a client comes to you that is involved in the criminal justice system or due to a search warrant. Those are the things that you're going to look at. So I'm glad you touched on that.
No, definitely. And obviously everybody appreciates, including me, your willingness to kind of give people some insight into, what you do and how it works. And again, our purpose here is to just give, the full perspective, right, within the spectrum. So, one thing that I want to talk to you about is some people might be thinking, look, I mean, a judge reviewed the probable cause statement, found that there was probable cause. Like, what are you going to argue, dude? Like, what, Mr. Criminal Defense Lawyer, what do you expect to do? You're going to get a judge to overrule another judge who's, like in a courtroom right next to him or her? Here's what's interesting. In San Diego County, typically what will happen is whenever there's a challenge of a warrant, if the judge who issued the warrant is available, the rule is it goes to that judge. So essentially, you're in front of a judge saying, hey, judge, that one time when you issued that warrant because you thought there was probable cause, I'm here to tell you that you're wrong. Like, that's essentially what I'm doing, right? It's a very difficult position to be in as a criminal defense lawyer, right? You got to do it respectfully. You got to do it based on, case law, whatever, right? And I may do some research and say, look, judge, based on this evidence, higher courts have determined that this wasn't enough, and here's why. And if we can find case law and we can find examples of higher courts finding that a certain amount of information is not sufficient probable cause, because it's not white and black kind of thing, right? It's not a clear line. So if I'm able to do that, then the judge is like, okay, I messed up, right? Or, it was a close call. I made the wrong call on this one. You have binding case law that I'm required legally to follow. Okay, I'll reverse myself. But if I don't have that, okay, there's essentially slim to none chance that I'm going to get a judge to overrule him or herself. And, if it's slim to none, slim just left town. It's not going to happen. But here is where there are scenarios in which, I've personally had success. And generally speaking, there is a much greater opportunity to make an assertion that my client's rights were violated. And that is when in the probable cause statement, there's either a full-on misrepresentation of a fact or there's an omission that's material. If in the probable cause statement, there's a misrepresentation that from all intents and purposes, based on other evidence I'm able to put together, the officer was loose with the truth, right? Or just like ignored it or whatever the case, or just was negligent in looking a little bit deeper where a regular reasonable officer would have done, then that gives us an opportunity to say, look, judge, if based on this misrepresentation, if you take this out of the probable cause statement and you look at what you got left, it's not enough probable cause. Right. And that is successful, right? Sometimes. Another is an omission. So if it's a material omission where, you add this thing back in and it changes the whole feeling and the whole dynamic of the probable cause, then guess what? That also is important. And I had a case like that. Now it wasn't the search of a home, it was a blood draw. Because nowadays, if there has to, in almost every scenario, for a blood draw, after, for example, a DUI or something, there has to be a warrant. There's certain requirements that have to be met before you can get a warrant, right? And one of them is the person refuses to take another type of test, right? We'll get into that. We touched on it in another video, but we'll get into that at some point a little bit more.
Yeah, that's a good one.
In that case, and I won't kind of get into the details, but in that case, essentially, I was able to get body-worn camera that contradicted the assertions that were made in this affidavit, right? Contradicted what the cop said. And the judge reviewed it. And he was like, look, I looked at this. You said this. The body-worn camera shows something different. If I take that out, if I take the misrepresentation out, you don't have enough. That warrant should not have been issued for that reason. Therefore, the blood that you got needs to be suppressed, right? So that.
And if the blood's suppressed, there's no evidence of alcohol in someone's blood that was obtained via a search warrant that ultimately was deemed to be bad. Then what happens?
So, right, with the DUI, so this particular case was a little bit interesting because with the DUI, there's two separate counts, the A and the B. The A says you were impaired. The B says your BAC was 0.08 or more. So essentially what we were able to do is take away their ability to argue that the B count could be proven, right? Because they didn't have anything.
They had no blood, no alcohol in the blood. You can't use the blood. Search warrant was no good. So that full count goes away. Right.
And in that case, it was a felony. And so that case, that gets dismissed. But then the question is, did the person submit the field sobriety tests, right? And if they did, then there could be independent evidence of impairment, which would be good enough for the A count. And so, we've talked about this in another video, But that's an example of, why someone should keep in mind their ability to refuse to take field sobriety tests, right? In most
Right.
situations. So those are some of the ways in which you can get or challenge a warrant. So the warrant isn't going to be set in stone, and it doesn't mean that your prosecution and the evidence against you is absolutely going to be used. But another thing that I want to talk to you about was a scenario in which somebody is, and so in case this isn't clear, for someone to enter your home to conduct a search, the Constitution very clearly says you need a warrant, okay? So, and there's a whole bunch of other law about what's considered a home and the surrounding area of your home, but just to keep it simple, you need a warrant to get into a house. But here's what sometimes happens. Remember, a criminal defense lawyer's worst kind of nightmare, right? Or the criminal defense lawyer's, the word that we don't like to hear is consent, okay? Because what will happen is sometimes there'll be a cop knocking on the door. Hey, buddy, hey, look, I'm here to investigate your roommate. Can I come in? Oh, just my roommate? Yeah, just come in. So they come in. They're like, where's the roommate? Where's the roommate? Oh, over there. Okay. Well, the cop can't actually go into that room because that room is identified as being someone else. They need a warrant to get in that room. But let's say the door's open and they can look on the bed. And let's say that they look in the bed and there's, a big pile of drugs or, guns or whatever.
The stolen ATM machine is there.
Stolen ATM machine in the closet that you can see because the door's open. Now, the question is, did the cop have a right to be in the house in order to look in the bedroom? The answer is yes, because somebody with authority let them in. And so in that scenario, guess what? Now, all of a sudden, I had no ability. I probably, as a cop, you may not have had any ability to really get probable cause to believe that the ATM's in that room. But now you're legally in that house because a roommate with authority let you in, and you didn't enter, you didn't search that because it's in plain sight, right? Plain view. And now you can call a judge and get a warrant.
If I go to your house, let's say you have roommates, and I'm asking about one of them, but you let me in the house, and in a common hallway, this is common areas and private areas are very important to differentiate private space versus public space. Very important because you have the authority to let me into your house, into the hallway where you have access and control over because you're a roommate there. You don't have the power to allow me to, or the authority to let me search someone's room. But because the door is open and I see the stolen ATM machine on the bed or the coat with the scale and the baggies right there in plain view, then I can, freeze it and get a warrant. I've been on calls for service regarding something as I'm in this house legally because I was let in via consent. I see, identify, know, whatever as B, which is not something I was there for, but even bigger deal, the stolen ATM machine's there. And I got called for a, noise complaint or a barking dog, in the backyard or maybe they thought it was injured. I've been on calls like that. That's how I'm in people's houses. And now I have to freeze it and get a search warrant. So it's very important to understand what's private, what's public when you don't have to let the police in. And I'll take the opportunity to say this. I may say this a couple times, but I think this is a good time to say it, is I'm going to for sure get people from my profession that are going to I can't believe you're talking about this. I can't, believe that, you're linking up with this criminal defense attorney having these conversations. And two things to that. One, too close-minded. We are here to give the masses some information about how this system really works. This system is not perfect. The people within it are not perfect. No one is. And it's what we have. And so we're going to help you navigate it. Two, if I get arrested, I'm calling you no matter what. And I will make sure that the police officers follow the rules. If it was a hexagon box that day that they had to play in, they have to play within that hexagon box. So I just want to take that, it's a good transition to say it because I don't think there's a ton of people like me out there that are putting some of this stuff out. And obviously there's some stuff I'm not going to put out and talk about that, related to officer safety and tactics and things like that. But as far as how the system works, that was a good example of you had the authority to let an officer into a house, into the common area. So you didn't, let him into my room yet. But as he's walking down the hallway, he sees into my room and I've got the stolen ATM machine. So
Well, look, I think we're out of time.
But we covered.
Quite a bit, man, and it's really good
Yeah.
stuff. Hopefully, you guys watching and listening are valuable. And so that does it for today. Thanks again for joining us on Off the Record, a Cop and a Lawyer, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.